I think everyone has a unique potential to impact people in a very positive way. And I also believe that there is a unique set of circumstances as well as personal responsibility that comes into anyone's life when they're going out and doing something. Like, yes, I made the choice to go live a positive life and continue to learn and do the things that I do. But at the same time, if it wasn't for very fortunate circumstances that even gave me the opportunity to have that awareness to go work hard and do those things, I wouldn't be where I'm at today.
The only one that can improve your situation is you. You're the only one that has control. We may have these illusions that others have control or like they're going to save us or help.
In case you missed it.
One of the most powerful ways we honor our loved ones is by sharing with others and not just keeping it to ourselves. Talk about the impact they had on your life and the lessons that they taught you. And by keeping their memory alive through storytelling, you inspire others to appreciate the significance of their own loved ones as well. And then you can live their values. So think about the qualities and values that they embodied, whether it was kindness, generosity. Strive to incorporate these traits into your own life, because that's going to create a legacy and positively impact the world for sure. And then you can be grateful. You can be grateful to reflect on the positive memories and the experiences that you shared with your loved ones, because practicing gratitude, that's going to help you find peace and appreciation for the time you had together. So the biggest thing is to just honor their memory through action. Let's remember.
Available everywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Welcome back, Impact Heroes. Today we have the pleasure of speaking to our latest iSpark Change social impact hero, and he is an interesting one indeed. Our guest today is known as the Detective E.V. Sounds very interesting. He's someone who knows what it's like to suffer from health challenges, as he did for over a decade. He's since found the path to improving his own health, knows the importance of taking care of your health in so many ways, and he wants to help you do the same as a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. He also was once an atheist and is now a follower of Christ. I'm sure we'll dive into that too. He's a teen mental health keynote speaker who's given over 500 presentations to date to over 50,000 high school and college students and counting. Wow, that's a lot of kids. And he's someone who knows your dream is your dream and quitting isn't an option. Please welcome the authentic, opinionated host of the top 1.5% podcast in the world, the health detective, Evan Transue. Evan, welcome to the iSpark Change podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know we have a lot of things, a lot of different directions we could go. So I'll dive right in. So we see you as someone who is sparking change, spreading positive change, improving the lives of others, and by our definition, a social impact hero, which is an acronym of someone who honors their purpose, engages their audience in their mission, ripples their message to spread positive change, and opens their heart to the world. So I think you check all those boxes. So we see you as a hero. My question to you is, do you see yourself as a hero?
Well, that's a nice first question. Dang, you're getting right into it. I mean, no, other than to myself, I think that would be accurate, right? And I don't mean that just humbly, I mean that seriously. I think everyone has a unique potential to impact people in a very positive way. And I also believe, and I say this in my speeches all the time, I believe that there is a unique set of circumstances as well as personal responsibility that comes into anyone's life when they're going out and doing something. Like, yes, I made the choice to go live a positive life and continue to learn and do the things that I do. But at the same time, if it wasn't for very fortunate circumstances that even gave me the opportunity to have that awareness to go work hard and do those things, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. Not to mention, I mean, this is kind of an overused thing, but I think it really does matter. I mean, I grew up in America. I could have grown up in a third world country, and I didn't do that. So to myself, yes. To others, I mean, that's their opinion, whether or not that's true or not.
And I would bet, Evan, just with reading about you and your background and everything before, doing this interview, I would bet that if I asked some of those 50,000 students that, they would agree with me. So I do want to dive into how you got there. So, an interesting part, everybody sees kind of the today's version of the journey, right? Today's version of where you are at, and what you're doing today. Um, I do like, at least what I've seen on your social media, is that you will share some things that are, oh, this was 8 years ago, this was, back 7 years ago, things like that, to show, paint that picture. So share with our audience, how did this start, that you got on this path of speaking, functional medicine? I mean, all these things. How did you get here from, from where you were?
Sure. Well, two things there, and one's a quicker one in the beginning, but appreciate that you mentioned that and actually saw that on my social media, because to me, when I was posting this stuff back then, so maybe it's even a little premature, it'll kind of make more sense with my second answer, but I posted it back then before I had the outward results because I knew it was going to work. And I wanted to show people that this was something that they could duplicate, because if I actually achieve what I say I'm going to achieve, then this was a person that was not special at all, average person in almost every sense of the word, and is making decisions to better their life and continue again to learn. So I wanted that proof, because there's so many things online nowadays that, like you said, you only get to see the best part of it, and it's almost impossible for us to comprehend where they were at one time. And it's like, nope, I told you 10 years ago, right after I got arrested and kicked out of school, I'm going to do this. So I kind of don't want to leave people on a cliffhanger. So obviously that has a huge part to do with the other part of this answer here, which is, how did I get into this? I grew up in a really nice area, a really nice home, middle class to upper middle class, depending on the year. And I had most of the things that I would have wanted. I don't mean spoiled to the excess of driving a BMW to school. It's not one of those stories, but I mean safe, comfortable, happy. Everything's good in that sense. And that really matters. And when I
Mhm.
was at school, one of the things that was starting to interfere with the schooling was that I had these mental health issues that were starting to develop. I'm 28 now. These symptoms started at 5 years old. So this is 23 years ago. And I
Wow.
want people to really think, because most people that are watching this, I'm sure, more than old enough to remember 2 decades ago. I want people to think about the difference with how we viewed mental health back then versus how we view it now. I mean, really, the last 5, 6 years, for better or for worse, has been the huge shift in how we view mental health. But 20
For
years ago,
sure.
there's a stigma that affects everyone, including healthcare professionals. And because they're people too, people forget this. And what I mean by that is, we actually went in, my parents and I went into the doctor's office at 5 years old when I was five, and we talked to them about the symptoms that I was dealing with. I did not get diagnosed with any mental health conditions at that time. I got told with my parents that I was getting a little too worked up. I was going to outgrow this and things would be fine. And I don't mean that in some, I think people almost get like this movie or TV show image of like an arrogant doctor dismissing the patient. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. I mean, that person really believed what they were saying and thought that, oh, yeah, he's just going to outgrow it. So that's what I meant when I said the stigma affects other people too, not just us as people who might not be in the healthcare profession. Obviously, you and I are to a degree, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. And so that was really powerful in a negative way, because as these symptoms got worse, 6 years old, 8 years old, 10 years old, I only had a kid level comprehension of what was going on, but I remembered what he said. This is probably one of the only things I remember from 5 years old, is that, wait a second. Okay, so if this doctor, smart person, can't figure this out, something must be wrong with me, because I'm not outgrowing this like he said. It's actually getting a lot worse. And it was quite subtle for a time. I mean, it was almost 10 years, seriously, 5 to 15 years old. I could maintain this well enough to still get the good grades in school. That was kind of my thing. I wasn't good at sports, but I could do very well in school. So I could get the straight A's still. I could do really well on the important standardized tests. But 15, that was the final straw. The mental health issues were now so strong and so overwhelming. I couldn't ignore this, and it was having a direct effect on every area of my life. So within basically 1 year, my grades went from, at that point, A's and B's to I'm getting my first D's and F's on stuff. I mean, sometimes through
Yeah.
just lack of participation, just not doing the stuff that was required of me. I had an incident running away from home for a little bit. That was a huge thing. But what was happening really is, what used to be occasional panic attacks and some anxiety here and there was now fully, soon to be diagnosed panic disorder generalized anxiety disorder, and major depressive disorder. But again, it was 10 years before all these things manifested together. And my solution for this, as still someone who is holding this belief that, okay, I was supposed to outgrow these things. I didn't. There must be something wrong with me. And we're not learning about mental health in school. I think we had one suicide speaker, which is very important. And I'm glad that they had that. But that was it. They didn't talk about the anxiety or depression that led up to that suicide. It was more just, hey, never do that if you have those thoughts. So useful speech, but we needed more. And the coping mechanism that I had for these things was drugs and alcohol, mostly just drugs. When that started, that was the beginning of the end. The drug use became very severe very fast. It's not what people might think in the sense of I wasn't injecting anything. It wasn't like a heroin type of thing, but it was using very specific drugs to cope with the stuff I was dealing with. So I used a lot of Xanax, benzodiazepines, that whole family of stuff, which would have been the irony is would have been prescribed to me if I went and did it properly. But
Mhm.
I was using it in way excess doses and, of course, getting it illegally. Heavy, heavy use of marijuana. And then the alcohol thing, I never really liked alcohol, but what I did use alcohol for, I'm not proud to admit this, is to potentiate, well, I mean, strengthen the effects of the
Mhm.
Xanax. So I would take Xanax, I would down it with a couple of shots, I would smoke weed right afterwards. And you say, well, what is the point of that? Like, I mean, looking back from a third party perspective, what would be the point of doing that because you're not even going to feel it? That was the point. When I did that within 15 minutes, I didn't remember anything. And I was gone for the rest of the night. And I woke up in the
Mhm.
morning, slept for 12, 15 hours, and was like, okay, whatever. But the reason that I did that was, I think, to get an escape from the things that I was feeling. So it's not even that I was curious about drugs. I was actually one of the kids who was very not curious. If I never had these mental health issues, I legitimately might have been that person that never touched a sip of alcohol till way past 21. I just wasn't interested.
Yeah.
But of course, is this happening? This is happening. Things are getting pretty bad. And so, to finally answer your question, because this prefacing did matter, what occurred is the masks got harder and harder to wear. Holding up to these social images became impossible. And I did make it through 10th and 11th grade, so 16 and 17 years old, but senior year wasn't going to be a thing for me. And I made it 17 days into my senior year of high school and I got kicked out. I was arrested. I went to juvie, and I'm not some hardened criminal, by the way. I went to juvie for 4 days, just so people know. Like, I never want to make this sound like tougher or cooler than it actually is. Not cool, but you know what I mean. Like that whole like, oh man, he did that and he came out of it. It's like, no, I went for
Mm.
4 days and it was a pretty safe juvie. Like I felt totally okay there. I just didn't want to be there. And
Yeah.
so I went
I'm
through these.
guessing what you just shared there is really resonates when you're speaking to kids to tell them
Yes,
that and
yes.
say, yeah, hey, look, I was there for 4 days.
Yeah. So yeah, because they're like, oh, at first, I'm like, no, just joking. I was 4 days. And what happened after that, it was a few days or a few months, I'm sorry, later. I went back to the same coping mechanisms when I got out of juvie. So I was on house arrest and probation and I'm still doing drugs. But then I had what I call my aha moment. And admittedly, that's probably a 4 or 5 minute story in and of itself. So I'll kind of pause there before we get to the aha moment thing. So just so I'm not talking off the rails.
Yeah, well, that's good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing everything. I I always find it's interesting. It's interesting, Evan, is sometimes the story behind the story. So, what do you think, looking back, do you think that your mental health issues stemmed from something, and now with your experience, right, in emotional health, do you think they stemmed from something physiologically, or do you think there was some external variables that played a role? I know, in as a teenager, you had some issues with acne and things like that. Do you think there was some internal variables, external variables? Where do you think it was coming from, if you know, or if you could look back and
It's an
understand it?
awesome question. I've spent hours thinking about this, especially when I was first getting out of these things. So, because acne does matter, right? So, most of the things, though, here's my answer. I actually 100% know it had to be a physiological thing because I don't meet the diagnostic criteria for this stuff anymore. But what I will say is there are circumstances that come into one's life, such as severe cystic acne, that exacerbate the problems that were already there. So the only reason I can speak on this so confidently now is because, one, again, I don't have the symptoms of this stuff, thank God, and I haven't in years. But first and foremost is when life was good, before the acne, before the issues at school, before the failing grades, before the health issues that my mom had later in life, 5-year-old Ev, perfect life on paper, is dealing with panic attacks. And so that's where I know there was the root of all of this was physiological, but mental health is extraordinarily complicated. And I always kind of make the point that this is not clinical. So if someone thinks I'm out there with the credentials to say this, don't think that. I'm just giving my opinion on it. I kind of label mental health issues in one of two categories, meaning that they're circumstantial or non circumstantial. So,
Hmm.
circumstantial is exactly as it sounds. There is a circumstance or set of circumstances that triggers the mental health issues. So, for example, not that we need to go too much into this, but if someone was abused as a child and then immediately or soon after started exhibiting symptoms of mental health issues, that would be a circumstance that led to that. And
Hmm.
similarly, non circumstantial means either the root of it is not clear or it really seems just non-existent. It's like there's no emotional things that would have led to this. But what I find is that once you're a few years into dealing with these things, maybe even months, it's now both. Because I've worked with people who had completely circumstantial based mental health issues, and shares this story publicly. That's why I'm sharing it for her. So her name's Amanda. Her father unfortunately passed away in a house fire when she was a kid, and she came to me like 12, 13 years after this happened to work on functional medicine stuff. And I felt this was way out of my scope, but she adamantly said, I've been to therapy, I've done all this stuff. It's not that it doesn't help, but I think I've gotten to where I can with this. And we run her labs, and it was like, oh my gosh, she was a mess. So now these circumstantial things led to these biological issues. So, but by the way, technically speaking, there's always a circumstance, right, that is actually leading to this. There's always a cause.
Yeah.
When I
Yeah.
say non circumstantial, I mean no stereotypical
Yeah.
circumstances. So,
Yeah.
and
Sure.
vice versa, right? My non circumstantial mental health issues led to incidents like getting kicked out of school and arrested that were minorly traumatic, moderately traumatic at some times. And so now I do have this emotional circumstance leading to it. So great question, but I do believe the root for me was 100% physiological at one point.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that because I think I think a lot of people they if they're in similar situation and obviously our audience, I mean they're not going to be 5. Our
Mhm.
audience is going to be older. The point still remains is that a lot of people out there, and especially as you alluded to earlier, that the incidence of mental health issues has proliferated in the last few years, especially amplified even after the pandemic and everything. So there's plenty of individuals that have some type of mental health issue and they're asking why. They're asking that question why me, where did it come from, how do I deal with it, what do I do, that they just have this uncertainty that makes it even more uncomfortable. I would imagine for them. And so I think to hear that explanation, I think that does help to put it in context, from your experience.
Sure. And I've seen other people out there with similar things. I will say I have seen less people that would fall in the category of what I've described as non-circumstantial, but it does exist. I actually spoke with, and he shares a story publicly as well. I worked with a young guy, a little older than me, but still a young guy, who was in it's not a speakers bureau, but let's just say we all spoke for like the same organization. We represented them for mental health. And I
Hmm.
remember he stood out to me because he even wrote a book. His name's Lucas, and his book's called My Perfect Life: How Depression Almost Ended It. And his story was identical in the sense that on paper everything looked good. And what was interesting though is we were both speaking for the same organization, except my story ended with, "Hey, I don't have this stuff anymore." Maybe that can be true for you, maybe it can't. I'm not a doctor, I don't know, and that's genuine. I really don't. But with him, it was, "No, I've learned how to maintain this stuff well enough that I can go participate in life." And his story stood out from the rest of them because other people had been through very serious traumas or whatever, and they were living healthy enough lives now, which was a blessing. It's awesome. And finally, after like 5 years of speaking with him, we got him to do some lab testing with us. And that was the first time he didn't need an antidepressant anymore. So I thought that was really interesting because you can kind of you can take a guess at who's going to really have like majorly transformative experiences with the labs and protocols that come
Hmm.
from them regarding mental health at least based on their own description of their mental health story. Like they'll know if they had something serious happen to them or not. And whether or not they share that with you in depth is a different story. They don't really have to. But when you find those people that are like, no, my life was great. Like I felt like everything was awesome. And they still continue to deal with this stuff. That's what I look out for. I'm like, okay, I know that I can help you because there's still a cause to this. You just don't know what the cause is right
Yeah, exactly. That's why you're saying there's always some type of
now.
cause.
Yes.
And with both of us and with your functional health and myself with Revive Biohacking with my business, is I've seen lots of individuals that have benefited from some of the modalities that we offer, like red light therapy, which you have at your business and we have, or the contrast therapy, brain tap, different things that we offer. And so, question that's going to be similar to my question earlier. Okay, looking back at when you were younger, okay, looking back at when you were younger, and that what you said, what you phrased as, I spent hours thinking about this, about the causality, right? Later, you have some external variables like the acne and so forth that are going to play a role into that mental health. But when you're young, have you looked back at things like, what was my nutrition like when I was 5? What are some of the, was I around pesticides? Was I, just whatever it is, knowing what you know now, right? As a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner.
Of course, that ended up being everything. And so my parents, just to be clear, well-educated enough people, but again, we're going back 20 something years ago. I don't think people had the same awareness around food and stuff. I know that the
Hmm.
people existed, like there were individuals who knew about this, but certainly it was not as obvious as it is now. Like when you're in the store, not that organic's perfect either, but I mean it's pretty clear. You have the organic stuff, you don't, and everyone kind of intuitively knows that probably that's a little bit better, even if they can't explain why. Oh, maybe it's too expensive, whatever. And that could be true. So I'm not arguing on that. I'm just saying I don't think there was as much awareness back then, so I don't want to condemn them for it. But
No,
with that
definitely
said,
not.
yeah,
I just want to amplify that point for everyone, not just for your parents' sake, but you go back to 20, 25 years ago.
mhm,
I mean, we didn't know a fraction of what we know now when it comes to,
thankfully, yeah,
alternative health, medicine, diet, all of that. I mean, it's just been so exponential in the past, decade, especially the past 5 years. It's been so exponential that it's just so far from where it was. And any people in the space would tell you the same thing. So yeah,
yeah.
please continue.
Well, and I appreciate that because it's like nowadays, it seems more obvious. So some people are like, "Oh, how could you feed your kids that?" I'm like, "Okay, my parents love me to death. It's just there wasn't an awareness. They were locked in the mode of, okay, if someone is overweight, that is when you need to change nutrition. Nutrition has nothing else to do with any other health condition, though, and there's still many people out there that believe that or look at it that way. So what I was eating is crap, right? You're talking about Cheerios for breakfast. I'm having a wheat sandwich for lunch with gosh knows what type of cookies, the generic mac and cheeses and pastas for dinner, Elio's pizza, fast food, McDonald's. Like it was the standard American diet. And for me, no matter how sick I got, interestingly, I never really was someone who gained weight easily. Even to this day, it's a little easier now, but that was still something I had to work on health wise to be able to gain healthy weight, believe it or not. And so
Mhm.
yeah, it was exactly what you think. Like you got the Ritz crackers, you got the Kraft mac and cheeses, all this kind of stuff that is marketed to our parents as well, unfortunately, as oh my gosh, it's so convenient, it's so easy, your kids are gonna love it. And it's like, well, no, it's killing them. So my conclusions around that stuff were, I mean, one, I've done testing and I actually found that both my mom and myself have a measured immune response to gluten that's non-celiacs and it's not an allergy. So it's really
Oh, wow.
interesting because it'd already be hard enough to diagnose those things sometimes.
Yeah.
Allergy would be a little easier, but to find this, non-allergy, non-celiac immune sensitivity was huge. But then in addition to that, I'm thinking about this, like I'm the generation that grew up with the GMOs as like a guinea pig. Like that was
Hmm.
something that was being put into baby foods for the first time. And by the way, you guys got to watch out because it's still stuff still happens. But I mean, at least now you'll have the products with the non-GMO project label on it or something, but that was not a thing. This was like, again, touted as something that was amazing. People had no idea what these things were. Still, I mean, the corruption, particularly in the United States, is amazing at keeping people ignorant to what they're actually eating and not eating. But that's besides
Yeah,
the
for
point.
sure.
And so all those things, I think it was my conclusion now was a neuroinflammation issue of sorts that manifested as severe mental health symptoms.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense, as you break it down that way. And again, hindsight is 2020, knowing what we know now, right? And you have, I'm sure a ton of education in this, more so than I do, in terms of nutrition and everything, to look back and think, oh yeah, yeah, that's really clear on what could have been playing a role in your condition. So let's transition then to more to where you are now,
Mhm.
or at least in terms of the the functional diagnostic nutrition. Because what was the turning point for you to say, hey, I'm going in that direction? Because I know that plays a big role now, obviously, your the work you do speaking with mental health, but also the work you do there. I know that's all interconnected for yourself. So how did you How did you go down that, down that path?
Yeah, it's like my favorite story and favorite question because this kind of goes back to the aha moment thing. So when going back, we were arrested, kicked out of school, right? I'm 3 months into this. And ironically, it's New Year's Eve of that year. So I got arrested in September of that year, and it was New Year's Eve now. And when New Year's Eve comes around, I actually was quite good at making it seem to other people like things had gotten better. I mean, mostly because you don't want to tell your parents and probation officer you're still doing drugs. That'd be pretty stupid. But I was proficient in overselling it, like really making them think like, oh yeah, no, things are we're on the turning point here. It's all good. And one of the unique things that happened for me when I got arrested was it was 13 days before my 18th birthday. And that leads these probation officers to be in a tricky situation because you were arrested as a juvenile and charged as such, but you're an adult now. Like literally 2 weeks into your dealing with the law, now you are an adult. And so they have to figure out ways to deal with you while also still trying to get you ready for this life that you're going to have afterwards, right? This huge transitional period for people. And so one of the things that happens is you're actually, as crazy as this might sound to some people, you're actually allowed out till like 12 a.m on juvenile probation, and where I live at least, if you're 18 or over. So kind of weird because it seems like way too late to stay out, but they do allow that. And so I made a deal with my parents and probation officer that I should be allowed to go out on New Year's Eve. And I said, I'm fine with getting picked up by my parents. I'll do whatever I have to do. Like, I just want to go see my friends. And as far as these people in my life knew, everything was going well. And so they did agree to this because they thought, okay, this is important. He needs to be around these people again because there's going to be a point where this happens and he needs to learn to be around them and not do the things that they're doing. And how could he possibly do it on New Year's if he's getting picked up by his parents? Well, don't underestimate the stupidity of an 18-year-old. I got out into this mini party, friends all together. It wasn't like a crazy rager, but it was like, 25, 30 friends all together. And I made it about 10 minutes into that night before I started choosing to drink and do drugs. Well, we get picked up at 12 a.m., just like we were supposed to. And I haven't said we yet. We is myself and my girlfriend. And so I've been dating this girl for about 4 or 5 years at the time, and on and off, very, very turbulent because of my actions. It was just an awful thing at the time. And we get picked up, but I had convinced her to do the same things I was doing that night. Now, she thought that was stupid because we're going to get picked up, but, again, don't underestimate. So I had her, drinking, doing the stupid stuff she wouldn't normally do. And she was okay, but she wasn't as good at hiding those things as I had become. That's not a skill you're proud of, but I was good at hiding these things. So we get into the car, about 30 seconds goes by, and she is so drunk that she repeats a full sentence, almost word for word, to my parents. It would be like me saying, "Hello, how are you today?" And you're saying, "I'm good, thanks. I'm good, thanks." Like it was like, "What are you doing?" Oh my gosh, right? It was like a blip in the brain. And so I'm sitting there, hands on my face, like, yo, shut up. I'll talk. I got this. It was too late. My parents that is probably one of the most mad times I've ever seen them in terms of just how angry they were. We're going down the road. My dad slams on the brakes. He turns around with my mom, and they are screaming at the top of
Mm.
their lungs, not at me, but at my girlfriend. Now, I grew up with a sibling. I don't know if anyone else did that, but if you get in trouble with a sibling, usually one of you gets it first, the other one gets it next. So I'm kind of anticipating that this is how this is going to go. And they never yelled at me. Now, what happened in that car is like a realization of many things all at once. As they didn't say anything to me, I started to be like, oh my gosh, they don't think I did anything. And I think in their back of their heads, I don't think they wanted to believe that either. So they're blaming her, saying, "Why? How could you do this? He's in trouble, all this stuff." And I'm sitting there thinking, like, "Oh my gosh, I'm the one that made her do this." But I didn't have the courage to say anything at that time. So she loved me enough that she didn't say anything, and I didn't care about anyone else enough to say anything. We get home. Her and I end up upstairs. We're in my room. And instead of saying what should have been said, which would have been something along the lines of like, "Thank you so much for having my back. Like I could have been sent to jail tonight. If this happened, if this was known, I would have went to jail that night." And instead, I was in this it's not an excuse. It really is just to show where it was at the time, mindset wise. I was in such a world of delusion that my legitimate response to this was yelling at her for getting caught. Like that's where I
Yeah.
was mentally. There was no fault of myself in any of the circumstances that I was in. It was always someone or something else. And so I freaked out at her. Not that this is much better, but nothing physical, just to be clear, just verbal. And the last memory I have of this person is her crying for about an hour straight before we went to bed. And the reason that's the last memory is because I woke up in the morning. And remember, when I'm yelling, so I'm still drunk, I'm high. I wake up in the morning and I'm sober enough, and I notice that she's gone. Now, again, all of these thoughts are starting to rush into my brain. I'm realizing, okay, whoa, what the heck were you thinking last night? You got to have her back on this. Two, she covered for you 100%. Like, that is the last thing you should have done is yell at her. And all these things were happening. It was kind of a weird set of emotions. The way I describe it is it was almost like the floodgates of self awareness opened up. And so this is not, and again, an excuse for anyone abusing drugs, but I think if anyone's dealt with this themselves or has a family member or friend that deals with these things, it almost seems like they're not thinking at all. Yeah, that's kind of how it feels. It really feels like you're living for 10 minutes ahead and not 10 years ahead. Those floodgates came down and I started thinking 10 years ahead. And I realized I love
Hmm.
this person. I need to apologize. And being the very dumb guy I was, I never actually said I love you out loud in the 5 years we've been dating. It was like an ILY on text. Like, I mean, this is crazy stuff, the fact that she was even still with me. So I go to call this person. And when I called, she didn't answer. Wait another 10 minutes, call. Wait another 10 minutes, call. And after about the 10th call, I started to realize this wasn't like the other fights. Normally, what would happen is I tick her off or we break up or something and I can get her back every single time. Not this time. There was something unique about that, I think because of the danger of the situation and just how severe it was, that she finally realized I can't be with this person.
Yeah.
And what's so crazy when you're in this stuff is that you think that you're hiding something. This person knew there was something wrong with me for all the years we've been together. She's waiting for me to accept it and get help. She had my back through all of that, but I'm sitting there thinking I'm hiding something. When I realized I lost this person that I was going to marry, and I just to be clear, but some people misinterpret this. Maybe I explained it incorrectly or improperly. She's alive. I just mean she's no longer in my life. That's for sure. When I
Mhm.
realized that this person was no longer going to be in my life, I don't know if it was just the icing on the cake, the final straw, or maybe I just cared about that more than I cared about myself. I don't know. But that was the slap in the face that I needed to start making a different decision. It hurt so bad that I understood if I don't change, like no one's coming to save me with this. I got people that support me. That's not to say I don't, but no one can change what I'm choosing to do and not do on a daily basis. Mom and dad can't bail me out of this stuff anymore. Like I can't keep doing stupid things. And I'm not saying it was perfect after that. This is very much a story of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But what I love about 2 steps forward, 1 step back is eventually you're 1 step back. Man, you're so far ahead from where you started, you don't even notice it. You're so much
Yeah.
better off.
Yeah.
But that is the answer. And thank you for allowing me to take the time to explain that because that aha moment triggered this new Evan Transue of, okay, I need to solve these problems rather than try to hide them. And in that trying to solve them, that's when I discovered the nutrition. That's when I discovered the functional medicine side, not through any real desire to get into that space, but because when I finally did open up and speak to Western medicine, and I'm not, they helped me a lot. They definitely cared. Western medicine only got me 50% better with the pills and therapies and counseling and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Not that therapy and counseling is even Western per se, but it's the stereotypical route of Western medicine. That only got me 50% better. If I wanted to get more, I had to get creative. And that creativity eventually led me to the functional medicine side.
Thank you for sharing the story. And I can feel the emotion behind it for sure. And the the big message that I get from that, Evan, is that you realize what a lot of people have to come to the realization in that situation, and I had to come to a similar one on my own, is that the only one that can improve your situation is you. You're the only one that has control. You know, we may have these illusions that others have control, or like you said, they're going to save us or help us or whatever, until we look in the mirror and realize that that's the person that I need to fix. Then nothing happens. Nothing happens for the good. So thank you for sharing that, because I know there are people that needed to hear that, and they may be in that time. And I know, like you said, it's not such a linear path after that. That it's messy, and there's
Mhm.
the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and there's pitfalls and potholes like there are in any journey, any heroic journey, as I term it. And so they may be in the middle of that and knowing, okay, there is that light at the end, at the end that I can continue on that path.
Mhm.
So now fast forward, fast forward to today. So what does that look like today? What would you say is your purpose today? How are you honoring that? What does life look like today for you, Evan?
Yeah, it's so timely, Rick, because I was just in church yesterday with my fiance, and we brought someone for the first time, so that was cool. He wanted to go, and they did this whole sermon around no matter the cards that you're dealt, it's not to just act like everything's okay and that it's fine. That's not what they're saying. But no matter what cards you're dealt, the only thing you can do, just practically speaking, is use the cards that you have. And so my life has very much become an example of just using the cards that I was dealt, which admittedly many of them were very good, but I took those good ones for granted. So they almost became irrelevant to some degree because at 18, I'm sitting there. There is no college. There is no high school diploma. There's no prospects of the future. I have a record. Like, it's not good, So this is it. And you got to figure out, how do you take this and run with it? And so today, the entirety of my careers is using these things that happened to help other people. Now, I don't want to go too motivational speaker mode, but one of my favorite quotes is, the final stage of healing is using what happened to you to help other people. That's the whole
Hmm.
point, at
Hmm.
least as I interpret it. And so, with the mental health speaking, for example, the whole story is honestly just a more dramatic version of really what I shared with you. I call that moment, like I said, my aha moment. And if I was speaking to kids and not on a podcast in a bit more casual setting, the whole moment builds up to asking them to make the speech, the aha moment, if they need it. Because I realize, remember, I mentioned in the beginning how I do believe a lot of this can be luck and good fortune. The good
Hmm.
fortune to me was getting the aha moment, because I've had other friends who passed away from drugs. And I kind of wonder, I'm like, did they ever get the floodgates of self awareness open? Or were their brains so fried from the drugs that they were using that all they could see is 10 minutes ahead as well? Because if you're 10
Hmm.
minutes ahead, man, I like to believe I'm a reasonably smart guy. If you can only see 10 minutes ahead, you don't make smart choices no matter how intellectually well off you might be. And so the fortune is the aha moment. It's getting the ability to see, if I don't stop this, I'm screwed. And then after that, it's hard work and personal decisions, but it's a blessing to get those aha moments. So that's the speaking. And then the functional medicine side is sharing not only my story, but usually actually other people's stories. So
Hmm.
my wife and I have, it's so weird to say wife. We just got married a couple days ago.
Well,
So my wife,
congratulations.
thank you. Yeah. My wife and I have a business together called Bucks County Light Therapy and Functional Medicine Center. And I've never gotten on a podcast with someone who related to that more, which is awesome. So really cool to meet you. So
Yeah.
we have this in-person side where we offer what you could call these biohacking type of methodologies. And then kind of the flagship stuff there is our functional medicine lab testing, where we help people with tricky health challenges that haven't been helped through conventional means, and we'll support them in any way we can. And then I do the podcast for the same place that I got the functional medicine training in 7, 8 years ago. And I just interview people, like literally interview people who have been through these crazy health challenges and stories as well, similar to how you're doing with me. And then they share to people how, hey, you can be down here, but then you can be up here if you start making these right choices and get some new knowledge. So, 10, 12, let's go back even farther than 10, I suppose. 15 years ago, would I have known that this could happen, or would I have wished to maintain living in my circumstances at that time? Absolutely not. But hindsight's 2020, and looking back, I said, "Oh my gosh, I traded my childhood basically because childhood kind of sucked." But the difference is, and you know this, another motivational speaker quote, most people die at 25 and get buried at 75. And so what
Yeah.
that means is they give up their dreams. It's not that they're literally dead, but they give up their dreams. They give up the hope. They give up the goals. And so they just live the same miserable life choice for the next 50, 60 years. And they call it a life. The trade off for me is, yes, I didn't like those first 18 to 20 years so much, but man, I get to spend the rest of my life not even knowing what the word work means, because everything that I
Yeah.
do is something that brings me so much joy.
Yeah, it's ironic you're sharing that because literally on my call this morning with I have interns that work with us at
Mhm.
iSpark Change, and the intern is that exact question came up, and that's what we talked about. That's what I talked about is even the research shows when people interviewed at the end of their life and they say nearly 80% of them say they regret not acting on a dream, regret living those 50, 60 years, like you said, in living Groundhog Day, for lack of a better way to explain it, rather than pursuing their dream and creating a beautiful life. And so it is possible for anybody, and you just have to take control of the reins. So before we wrap up, Evan, I do want to take a minute though, just to acknowledge the role of God in your story,
Mhm.
because I know I mentioned it in the intro, and God played a big part in, me changing my life and getting to where I am. And so I always love hearing, how he played a role in your life, and when that came about and everything.
Well, of course, now my belief is all these little intuitions and nudges, because even like the idea of becoming a speaker was wild. I hated public speaking. It freaked me out. I was nervous as crap to do it. And there's a difference between a feeling, a thinking thing, and a knowing. And I'm talking about the knowing. And if people haven't experienced that, or maybe they haven't been open to it, I don't know. That's I can't describe that. And I'm sorry, because it almost sounds lame to the people that think purely logically, because I resonate with that. I did that at one point. So they're like, what do you mean you just know? I'm sorry. I don't know how else to say it. There is a difference between a
Hmm.
feeling and a knowing. And you're like, yeah, that's it. And usually, you know what it is when it doesn't make any sense and you still feel that strongly about it. And so, with that said, all these little knowings that I had at one point when I was not of faith, I now completely contribute to God guiding this, because, I think it's not a reward per se, but I think he supports the path of people that are doing the right thing in his eyes, right? So it's almost like the people that talk about, hey, when I started budgeting my money, all of a sudden my income went up. And that's shockingly common. I know this isn't a money podcast, but it's shockingly common. And it almost seems like you get rewarded, kind of, maybe the word for doing so. It's, or you're trusted with more, let's say that. And so now I look at it all as God, but I only got officially announced my faith and really fully committed about 2 years ago. It was November of 2022. That's when I got baptized. And it's not that I don't want to give the full answer. I just don't know what's appropriate or inappropriate, one for this podcast, but two for the sake that I'm representing an other company that has nothing to do with religion or spirituality. Not that they're not religious or spiritual, but that has nothing to do with that. I will just say this: I had an initial spiritual experience, not drug induced, no psychedelics, no sleep deprivation, nothing even close to that. Spiritual experience that led me to know I must be wrong about something. It didn't make me Christian, didn't make me believe in God all of a sudden, but it made me realize I was wrong about something, because that thing that happened shouldn't have been able to happen. And then once I'm into something, I study it like a madman. So I mean, this was 5, 6 years ago, and I'm studying like 4 hours a day, like literally in my free time or in the car or whatever, trying to figure out what is that? What was that? And what's going on here? And so I got into what would be labeled as new age spiritualism, the crystals, the meditations, all that kind of stuff. And through that journey, I discovered, I'll just word it this way: I discovered that the bad was real. And that meant to me, by definition, the good must be real. And I chose the good. And so that's how I became a Christian.
Well, thank you for explaining that. And we have a lot of different listeners from all over the world with,
Mhm.
all types of beliefs. I think one commonality across probably most of our audience is that, that faith component, whatever that looks like, right? Spiritual, religious, however you want to define it, is that faith component. And so, so thank you very much for sharing that, Evan. I appreciate it. So a couple final questions before we wrap up. And first one is, and you've probably alluded to various moments like this throughout our interview, is that at iSpark Change, we've coined a term spark moments. And these are moments in life where our actions have a ripple effect that goes far beyond that initial act. It's like a pebble in a pond. And either you impact someone else and it has a ripple effect on their life, or your life was impacted by someone and that has a ripple effect on your life. So share a story of, positive change that where since that ripple effect, you've seen the positive outcome, or maybe it's just early on and you're seeing just the little sparks, at the beginning, and it's going to have a positive effect, something that you never would have thought of, having that positive effect.
Yep, I'll do one functional medicine real quick and then one mental health one. Not that they don't overlap to a degree, but the functional medicine one of the most special ones to me is the story of my mom, because she had a bunch of health conditions too that got really bad when I was a teenager, and she was way sicker than me, which is saying something. Yeah, I mean, that's not a competition, but holy cow.
Yeah.
And after a few years of me being into this, she became very open. I mean, my dad and her, without exaggeration, and they gave me permission to share this as well. They didn't have this money, to be clear, but they spent over $100,000 on her health trying to figure it out. And then it
Oh,
was eventually a $5,000 9-month functional medicine program that actually got her stuff under control. So kind of crazy how that worked. And man, I mean, my mom probably wouldn't be alive by now, or at the very least would be quite debilitated. And we will just say she's anything but those things at this point, which is a blessing. And then
yeah.
with mental health, one of the coolest I have a bunch, but one of the coolest stories ever was I went into a school locally. And that's the best part. It was like literally a school I grew up at. And I went and did a talk there. And this young man came up, and this one I do have to be careful with what I say, but a young man came up in a certain grade. Let's just say it was between seventh and ninth. So very young man. And he was bawling his eyes out and said, I don't want to die. I'm doing XYZ drugs. I'm done with this. I am so scared. And so I talked to him and I let him know I just use common sense with these kids because it's real. It's not like I'm lying. I'm like, just so you know, like you just told me this, but you didn't tell the guidance counselor this, right? And he's like, no. I'm like, who do you think brought me in today, man? Like, why do you think they brought me in? And it's funny because they actually do respond to that logic. They're like, oh yeah. I'm like, yeah, they're not here to call the cops on you. They're here to help. And
Yeah.
so again, I can't keep in contact with these kids. It's not appropriate. So I just know that I recommended them to the counselor. I see him walk out. That's it. I come back a month later for a parent talk, and the counselor's there. And she pulls me aside. She said, you know that kid that talked to you? And I said, yeah. She said, he came in the next day to school, went right into my office first thing in the morning, and he had a whole plastic bag filled with pills. And he said, I'm actually done. Please help me. And
Mhm.
so they didn't call the cops. They didn't do any of that stuff because what's the point, right? You shouldn't punish him for doing the right thing. And during that month, I can only speak for that month. Like, again, I can't keep track of this stuff years later. But during that month, he was working with a counselor outside of school. So he did tell his parents what he was doing as well. And then that counselor, I didn't fully understand this part, but that counselor outside of school was also into some type of martial arts. So he was apparently learning that now and developing the disciplines that come with that. So I'm like, that's amazing. But I don't know what that kind of kid will go and do, but when you see someone make that kind of transformation, I mean, he was using some pretty heavy stuff for anyone, let alone a seventh, eighth, or ninth grader. I I have a feeling I might hear about his name one day in the most positive way possible. So those are two things that were just awesome to me and had ripples.
Yeah, and those are fantastic examples, Evan, because one, you've seen the input, and a lot of spark moments. They're ones you never know the impact, and you never know the impact, and you just have to. In my case, I just trust that God has control of that, and that it will have the effect it's meant to happen. So thank
Yes,
you
sir.
for sharing those. So before we ask our final question, where can our audience connect with you? Where's the best place to learn more about you and your work and speaking and everything?
Yeah, thank you. So I actually just started a brand new Instagram a few days ago, totally dedicated to speaking because normally I talk about all stuff. And I just wanted to do a challenge. We're actually doing a little business challenge at FDN with some of our graduates. So I said I'm going to do the speaking side instead of the functional medicine side. So my new Instagram is Evan Transue Speaks. Only mental health, only inspirational stuff, no anything else if you're not into that. It's totally fine. And then in terms of functional diagnostic nutrition, you can find us at fdntraining.com. That's fdntraining.com. And our podcast is called the Health Detective Podcast. And I always look at podcasts like this, man. These are TV shows, right? These are modern TV shows. So it's not like you just watch one, you watch a bunch. And so the reason that you might want to tune into ours every now and then is if you need uh, particular levels of inspiration around very tricky health challenges. We have cancers on there, autoimmune, people that were told that they were going to die in 4 months and did our interview 6 years after they were told that. So
That's great.
it's very much around functional medicine and health. So that's where they can find me.
Okay, fantastic. All right, one final quick question here, Evan, before we wrap up. Our goal at iSpark Change is to positively impact 1 billion people within 5 years of launching our upcoming social impact social media platform. So we know we can't do it alone. We know we need the help of impactful leaders like yourself, social impact heroes, to show others the way, because many people feel, as I once did, that they're too small to make a difference. So we value your thoughts and opinions as a hero. And so I'm going to ask you to peer into the future, peer into the iSpark Change crystal ball, and tell me, what can the world become if everyone starts taking control and impacting the person in the mirror?
Well, I'm someone who I won't share my beliefs either way, but I'm someone who focuses a lot on political stuff. And I do believe a lot of the asinine things that we see going on have to do with us voluntarily giving our money to people who don't necessarily always have our best interest. So I think if people were on both sides, I think if people were taking control of themselves, I think that would go away so fast, or like our heads would spin. We wouldn't even know how fast that just went away because we'd actually be able to focus on that stuff and do something proactive about it rather than battling each other, left, right, conservative, republic, liberal, whatever. And so I that's an incomprehensible question to me, just in the sense that the impact and peace and progress that we would make if that truly is achieved, which I pray that you guys achieve that, that's a world that we couldn't even recognize, and I think it would just change the way that we do life, right? We're so focused on, oh, you got to go make 50, $60,000 a year to retire properly and do all this, and I think the world would become one of following people's hearts a little more, what they believe is guidance from God to go like actually follow their stuff, right? Like do the things that they're
Mhm.
supposed to do, not just pay some bills and then unfortunately die one day, right? So, man, I hope you achieve that because I'd love to know the answer myself, but that's the best guess I have.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. And yeah, we'll keep working on that as long as it takes. So
Mhm.
thank you for taking your time today to share your heart and wisdom with our audience, Evan. You came in, you over delivered as I knew you would, and your desire to be impactful is evident. You're filled with passion and determination, and you lead with a heart of service, which tells me you will continue to have success in all facets of life. And this is only the beginning of your social impact.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Impact Heroes, it's our stories that connect us all, and we love hearing Evans today. Evan Transue, you're not only an inspiring and amazing human being, you truly are an iSpark Change social impact hero. We'll see you all next time.
Visit rickcornelis.com to book him today.